This is the Road to the Kentucky Derby, presented by Woodford Reserve. We're at Churchill Downs in the Turf Club. I'm John Asher from Churchill Downs, an esteemed group here at this Kentucky Derby round table. Next to me, my co-worker Darren Rogers, who he took 2 minutes off from compiling points in the Kentucky Derby point system to be able to join us today. And across the table from twinspires.com, a couple of esteemed handicappers, very knowledgeable fellows. We have James Scully and Ed DeRosa. Gentlemen, here we are.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
And we are just over 2 months toward till the Kentucky Derby, and much to be settled. But before we start the discussion here, let's take a look at the leaderboard for the Kentucky Derby, looking at the points system as we are at this really a critical juncture, heading toward the Run for the Roses, just a couple of months out. And you look at the top 10 and the leaderboard, you've got 8 Derby wins in there, 4 for Dwayne Lucas at the top, maybe not with the horse we thought would be at the top a little bit earlier, and Bravazzo, who is coming off a big win. You've got 4 for Bob Baffert there, and then a lot of people hoping to pick up some points there. But the leaderboard at this point, surprises, Darren?
No, not really. We've got one championship series race on top with Bravazzo. He's got 54 points. That'll safely put him in the Derby. The question we're asked every year, how many points does it take to get in? That 20th and final horse, you want to have around 20 or 30 points.
Gentlemen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I look at the leaderboard and it tells you what horses have done so far and who's on top. To me, it gives me a lot of excitement because I think it's going to shake up a lot over the next, we have 10 weeks to the Derby, obviously a shorter time of number of races, but there's some names I think are going to crop up that I'm sure we'll talk about over the next few minutes or so, but I'm definitely excited for the next few weeks.
Well, we've been watching all those races closely, all those prep season races closely. We have hit to the part now where the real running starts, where you head toward that championship season.
Yeah, and real running starts and some real challenges as they stretch out to 9 furlongs. Definitely that's sort of the next hurdle, and going on with it from 2 to 3. I mean, that's never a gimme either.
Right, and the landscape is always changing. I mean, horses cannot stay static and win the Kentucky Derby from this point. They got to keep moving forward, and it can be a pretty jumbled mess in the middle of February, but we can count on things sorting themselves out over the next couple months.
And Darren, I don't know if we've settled anything in the prep season, certainly at this point, but it is always fascinating to watch these horses come forward.
It is, and I echo Ed's sentiment. I mean, you cannot, as a handicapper, underestimate the importance of the extra 3/16 of a mile that we'll see on Derby Day. For the most part, most of the horses have run a mile and a 16th thus far. Whether or not you're as spectacular, ask yourself, can this horse be as dynamic going that extra 16th of a mile and a mile and 1/8? Then you're going to have to go the extra 1/8 of a mile in the Derby, and really that separates a lot of the contenders from the pretenders.
I think the key to what he said is as dynamic. A lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, they'll get better at a mile and a quarter.
Right.
That might work on, in a starter allowance or something, but the Kentucky Derby, you have to be brilliant, and you have to be brilliant at a mile and a quarter. You don't suddenly get fast because it's a longer race, and obviously people could point to certain exceptions, but on balance, I want to see a horse be as dynamic.
And the dynamic in that, too, is that they're all doing something they've never done before. Right. With not only the distance and not only 20 horses in the field, huge crowd, all that thrown together, it's some intangibles sometimes.
143 years of history, kind of makes a good race.
It does. So on to the championship season we go. In any year for the Kentucky Derby, we've got 143 of them. In any year, you start the conversation with the horses that have been the dominant horses at 2, and there were 2 of those at the top of the list at the end of the year. The juvenile champion, Good Magic, who came really out of nowhere. He had 1 win in his career. It was the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And Bolt Deorro, who looked like a surefire champion until Breeders' Cup Day came around, and he ran 3rd. So we start the discussion on the 144th Kentucky Derby with those 2. Darren, I'll start with you and your thoughts on those 2, where we are and what they can be.
Well, I've never felt in my life that a horse that got beat 4 1/4 or 5 1/4 lengths was the best horse in a race, but I felt Bolt Deorro was the best horse in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. The way he was caught wide, I thought Good Magic was, the benefit of a kind track, and he broke through and won his race. Ultimately, what I'm saying is I want to see Good Magic do it again. Bolt Deorro, he was the fastest 2-year-old in my opinion last year, and I thought he showed it time and again on the racetrack.
I'll agree with he ran fast races at 2, but my big issue with Bolt Deorro is the fact that he has broken slowly in 3 of his 4 starts. And that's a little bit of a concern, especially if he's in races in California that have small fields, because he might be able to break well there, but how's he going to do it in a 20-horse Kentucky Derby field? Good Magic was a very well regarded. He ran on the Travers Day maiden race. That was the same race that Uncle Mo champion came out of. Always a really hot maiden race. And he got beat that day, but it was a 6 furlong. He lost his first 2 races at 1 turn, stretching out to 2 turns in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He won, and he won convincingly. So that really is an exciting element for him to be running longer this spring, stretching out to 1.25 miles eventually in the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, they are the 2 for me right now on top anyway. They're fast. I mean, their numbers are better than the other horses that we'll be talking about. And in part, it comes down to somewhat East versus West as well. And Good Magic did ship West and got the money in the Breeders' Cup. But the horses Bolt Deorro was beating before the Breeders' Cup and just the West Coast as a whole, what they've done shipping East, to me has been a lot more impressive. So I agree with Darren. I'm eager to see Good Magic do it again. Bolt Deorro, yeah, he needs to do it again too in terms of how much you like him for the Derby. But I think his talent is a little more cemented than Good Magic's after that Breeders' Cup.
But the big concern for me with Bolt Deorro is being sidelined by the muscle pull right after the start of the year. Now, it was just a muscle pull behind, but when you're trying to prepare to win a 1.25 mile race on a specific date early in the year, you have to have everything go your way. So watch Bolt Deorro, and let's see how he comes back when he returns in the San Felipe.
This is increasingly the way we've done business in recent years with people bringing horses into Kentucky Derby, but each in the best case scenario will only have 2 starts this year. Is that a concern for any of you?
Well, no, it's not a concern. And I will say, I mean, you can afford to have a hiccup early in the year in January or February and still win the Derby, but it does put more pressure. And with Bolt Deorro, they were planning on running him 3 times. Now they're going to the 2-race schedules.
And to me, it'd be more an issue if he hadn't raced so much as 2. There is some foundation there that with some horses, if that had been the plan off, just running twice in October and November, I'd be a little more concerned. But given what he did at 2, less of one, but no margin for error now, for sure.
Big Brown's an example. He was hurt early in his 3-year-old season and won the Derby. So there still is time, but you don't want to have any hiccups, ideally, in the road to the Derby.
As we move closer to Kentucky Derby 144, we'll be looking at the next 2 months of performances, looking for the outstanding performances. But that's in the championship season. Back to the prep season again. Outstanding performances for each of you. The one that really shines, the one that really points one of these horses as a major contender for the Derby. Ed, we'll start with you.
For me, the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, Good Magic's performance was superlative, and then you look at the horses behind him, and that adds another element to me. He beat Solomini, who I have a lot of respect for, Bolt Deorro, who's number 1 on my top 10 list. So looking at the body of work and the performance that went with it, I thought the Juvenile stood out, and it should. It earned him a championship.
Yeah, James?
Yeah, I'll echo Ed's thoughts. I like the Breeders' Cup Juvenile as well. I will throw in as my number 2 performance would probably be Audible in the Holy Bull. I was really impressed by how fast he ran, how impressive he was. So I'll go with Good Magic first, Audible second.
And as for, top race, I would say the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, but in terms of the fastest performance, I think it was McKenzie's performance in the Sham. They backed him up from 1 mile and 1/16 in the Los Alamitos Futurity to a more ideal 1 mile distance for McKenzie, and when he ran that race, it was lights out. I mean, I think it was one of the fastest figures, if not the fastest speed figure we've seen thus far as a 3-year-old.
Brisnet says so.
Brisnet agrees? Then I'm good with that.
So 3 votes overall for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, with a star for McKenzie. But again, the Juvenile has more points than any other race.
He mentioned Audible, who beat Free Drop Billy, who also was in that Juvenile.
Yeah,
so.
But the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, the race that gets the most points at this point in the prep season on the road to the Kentucky Derby. There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
The history of the Kentucky Derby, we have looked at a lot of battles of East versus West. Sometimes it comes down to a battle of which is the best horse on the East Coast, which is the best on the West. But we've also got horses in the Southwest. We've got them in Oaklawn Park. We've got them in New York. We're going to talk about the regions. Which is the strongest region in terms of home bases for horses heading into this year's Derby? Darren, off to you.
I'm going to start with California. I think California. You know, you always start with California and Florida, guys. I think we all know that. Good horses, fast horses can come from anywhere, but the divisions with the most depth are California and Florida. I think California gets the edge this year.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, look at Instilled Regard, Shipton won the Lecomte, Gravitos won the race at Remington Park, My Boy Jack just won at Oaklawn. The depth just looks superlative. I will say we're still waiting for a few horses to run back in East, so that'll give us a sense. I'd love to see the Midwest really step up. Steve looked like he was loaded. D. Wayne just won the Risen Star. Steve Asmussen was second. But to me, it's the West Coast for sure.
James?
Yeah, and I'll agree at this point in time. You know, as a handicapper, I always like to try to identify the strongest region leading up to the Kentucky Derby, and that's after the prep races are run. But right now, with the depth we have out there, with Bob Baffert having a whole collection of runners, as well as Bolt Deorro and others, I will say that the Florida region, Todd Pletcher has a lot of horses coming up for stake races, so it could potentially surpass it. But right now, unquestionably, California in my mind.
I'll ask you guys a question. Before the Southwest, My Boy Jack, where would you think he was ranked within the top 10 horses based in California?
Like bottom 10.
Bottom tier,
If he's
right?
on the top 10.
And he came out and got the money.
How many times have we seen in recent years Bob Baffert come east with his horses that, and sometimes with the top one, an American Pharaoh had a schedule you had to adjust a little bit, but you know, Bob perfected that one early, and I think it's a good indicator, and would agree with all of you guys.
Well, sometimes when you're so deep, you've got to separate your horses.
Yeah.
You got to go somewhere to get the points.
When one looks at this year's Road to the Kentucky Derby standings, you're going to see a few new names in there in terms of owners, trainers that have horses involved here, but a lot of familiar names at the top of that group, and people who have been stalwarts here in the Derby for the past few years. And let's have some thoughts on this year's. Let's look at the trainers first. Which trainers have the strongest hand heading into the championship season?
Well, I'll start with Bob Baffert out west. I mean, he's got Solomini, who's a top contender from last year, and McKenzie. On the East Coast, Todd Pletcher obviously has Audible, and he has a bunch of runners getting ready to run in prep. So you can always start with those two. They got 6 Kentucky Derbies between them, and they both have strong hands at this point in time.
If there were a trainer future wager back in November, I would have strongly considered Steve Asmussen as a likely value play because Baffert and Pletcher are always going to take money, Chad Brown, etc. He's had a few drop off. There's still a couple, though. New York Central came back and won an allowance. I think he can move forward off that. He's a name that has a lot of number power, maybe not the points power just yet, but I wouldn't give up on him. But, you know, certainly James touched on the names we're going to hear most.
Yeah, I trust in Bob, and I trust in Todd. Bob Baffert, of course, won the Derby 4 times with 27 starters. Todd Pletcher, he and D. Wayne Lucas are tied with 48 Kentucky Derby starters, and of course, Todd won it last year for the second time with Always Dreaming. Another name to look forward to, I would say, is Dale Romans, the Churchill Downs all-time winningest trainer, and he's got some sneaky horses. Free Drop Billy, I think, is the best of his lot, but I don't rule out maybe some late runs by a colt like Tis Mischief, who I think has the ability to continue to improve.
On the owner side, Godolphin has, I think, 2 in the top 15 plus UAE 2000 Guineas winner. So on the owner side, that seems to be a name that maybe, you know, they're definitely prevalent here, but usually not that kind of number power.
If all goes well on Kentucky Derby Day, there will be 20 horses in the starting gate for the Run to the Roses. That's the maximum. We're going to ask you to whittle them at this point, 2 months out, down to your top 10. We'll start with Mr. Rogers.
Well, I've got Solomini on top with Bolt Deorro, and then I've got a horse we'll get to in just a bit, in Justify in the 3-hole, but Free Drop Billy in 4, and then Good Magic in 5. Those really, I think, are the big 5 that I'm primarily focusing on at this stage.
Solomini's an interesting pick. He's kind of a forgotten horse in this sport.
Yeah.
Should not be.
I know he likes him.
Yep.
I like Solomini a lot. He missed a little time with virus, but he's back working very forwardly now for Bob Baffert. And I just saw him as like a big gangly teenager last year. He showed good class running second in 2 Grade 1 races, including the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. But I think he's going to have a lot more to offer as a 3-year-old. He's a son of Kerwin, and he's in the right hands with Bob Baffert.
Did split exactly in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, so
Yes.
he was the second horse, which people tend to forget.
Well, at the top of the show, I said I expect a big shakeup in the leaderboard, and part of that reason is my top 10 of the 6 points leaders, 4 of them aren't in my top 10. So I'm definitely Bolt Deorro's number 1, Good Magic 2. Expecting to hear a lot from them. With these top 10, sometimes you got to take a little shot, give people a reason to like some different horses. Everyone knows who Bolt Deorro and Good Magic is, so just as Darren has Justify third, Copper Bullet's sort of my reach.
But it is springtime and things can change in a hurry.
And we're grasping.
We feel right now. Exactly.
Right. I mean, what we're doing right now, the only leader or top 10 that matters is actually the leaderboard itself and how many points you have to where you get in. But our job, I think, is to speculate and forecast a little bit, project talent, and project it at 1.25 miles.
Especially with the future wager pool 3 coming up, and we've already had 1 and 2, and to get our top 10s out for that. But people are excited if they get 40 or 50 to 1, and a horse shows up in a race. It gives them a root, so it's fun.
In this segment of the Road to the Kentucky Derby presented by Woodford Reserve, we're going to buy, sell, hold. I'm going to throw out some names of some contenders for the Kentucky Derby, or pretenders. We may decide that at this point. But I'm going to throw out the names of 5 horses, and each of you tell me whether you're going to buy, sell, or hold on this horse heading toward the Derby. And we're going to start off with the leader in the Road to the Kentucky Derby point system, and that is the D. Wayne Lucas trained Bravazzo.
I'll buy. He's in the race.
Yep.
And he's got a lot of heart.
James?
I'll sell him right now. I think he still has to improve significantly off that race. So yeah, I'm against right now.
Yeah, I'm a seller.
All right, coming out of the same race from Jerry Hollendorfer's barn, Instilled Regard had a big win previous start, then came back, ran flat as the favorite. Where do we look at Instilled Regard? Ed, we'll start with you.
I'm going to sell him too, and part of that is, back in the Lecomte, it seemed to be a 1-2 race with him and Steve Asmussen's horse that I don't have to worry about pronouncing after today, Principe Guerme, and he ran even flatter than Instilled Regard. So based on that, I'm selling him as well.
He's going to be my alone hold, and the reason why I'm going to hold him is because he did not settle on down the back stretch of that race. He settled in the Lecomte. Maybe there's a chance that was just a bad day for him, but he has to come back and run obviously much better in his final prep.
I'll go contrarian. I'll actually buy because I think it's so low right now. I'll take a gamble and see if he can jump back forward. One race does not make a horse.
Noble Indy's the one I want out of that race.
Yeah. Darren, since he's rolling, since he's moving ahead, we're going to go on to the next one. And that would be Audible, coming off a big win. New York bred, coming off a really impressive win for Todd Pletcher. What do you do with Audible on this day?
I'm going to sell. Yeah. And basically it's because of the breeding. I just don't believe Audible is going to relish a 1.25 mile distance.
I'm a complete agreement with Darren there. I'm going to sell Audible. I think that he's a brilliant performer, perhaps up to 1.125 miles even, but 1.25 miles is going to be too far for him.
Since I have him 4th in my top 10, I'll call it a hold. I don't foresee moving him too far up. I think others are better, but I like where his position is and think that can hold. So I'm going to hold on to that one.
All right, unbeaten officially, although he did finish second to his stablemate Solomini, is Mackenzie. Where do we go with Mackenzie?
I'm going to be a Brisnet company man and buy. I'm going to believe the Brisnet speed rating. I know Bob's been very high on this. Our clocker friend Gary Young, who joins us Derby Week, has been high on what he's seen in the morning. Bob has a deep stable. I think Mackenzie's among the best of those. I'm buying.
I'm selling Mackenzie. I a little bit of the same concern with the distance as I do with Audible, and I don't think Baffert would have run him in the 1 mile sham if he really thought he was a serious Derby horse. He's really going to be really good in the upcoming preps, but I don't like him at the 1.25 mile distance. I'm
going to sell. I can't recall the last time we've seen a Derby winner swish his tail in the stretch. And if you notice the videotape of the Los Alamitos Futurity as well as the sham, with about 1/8 mile to run, he starts swishing that tail. To me, that's an indication of him getting tired. I think he's dynamic at the middle distances.
Our first mention of the Tail-Swishing Factor. We got one more horse on the buy, hold, or sell list, and we're going to look at a horse that intrigues me. I can't figure out what to do with him exactly, and that's Catholic Boy, who's coming off a loss in his first race of the year.
I'm selling and was selling even before the Sam F. Davis. The Remsen Stakes, to me, is just not a Kentucky Derby key race. 1.125 miles for 2-year-olds. We talked earlier about you want brilliance. You don't find it at 9 furlongs in November with 2-year-olds. I'm I sold him before the Sam F. Davis and not looking to buy.
I'm going to buy him. I thought that Sam F. Davis wasn't that bad a race. So yeah, he was a little bit short in it, but I've seen Kentucky Derby winners, most notably Super Saver, come back a little bit short in that race and win the Derby a couple races later. If he improves off that, like I think he can, then we'll see a much better effort next time.
I'm gonna hold. I actually, like James, I thought that was a good effort to move forward. I think very highly of Untamed Domain, who's raced exclusively on turf. Untamed Domain beat Catholic Boy. If I think that much of Untamed Domain, I've got to respect Catholic Boy, but I'm holding on him.
Yeah, I'm always intrigued by grass pedigrees in the Kentucky Derby, and that still got me on Catholic Boy, but we'll see. We are in the championship season. The big point races heading toward the first Saturday in May, and still plenty of great races on that schedule. Just sticking our toe in the water here. And which races are you guys looking forward to the most, at least in the short term? James, we'll start with you.
Well, San Felipe is the one I'm looking forward to. Two of my top 5 are going to be in that race. Bolt Deorro and Bafford's going to either run McKenzie or Solomini. The other one most likely will go to Oaklawn Park for the Rebel, but that's the one I'm looking forward to is the March 10th San Felipe.
Ed?
Yeah, and for me, I'll take the winner out of the Breeders' Cup that Bolt Deorro was in, Good Magic. Very eager to see him return in the Fountain of Youth. And from the looks of the field, he's going to have to earn it, which is what you want to see at this stage of the year. So for me, having the champion run back, I'm looking forward to the Fountain of Youth.
A couple of fascinating races there. Darren, to you?
I'm looking forward to both those races, and to what James was saying, whoever doesn't end up from the Baffert barn will end up in the $900,000 Rebel on March the 17th. So either Solomini or McKenzie will be shipping, facing some of the best. Now, there's a couple of up-and-comers in there, higher power and title ready, that I'm looking to see what they can do. Good
cross-section of the country for 3 major prep races coming up in the championship season on the road to the Kentucky Derby. About 2 months away from Kentucky Derby 144. This time back in 1999, we had barely heard of Charismatic, who won that Kentucky Derby, and frankly, last year with Always Dreaming, he was still a fairly new horse on the horizon there. So we're looking here for new shooters, horses that could emerge here over the next 2 months leading up to the first Saturday of May at Churchill Downs. And Darren, let's start with you. Who would be your brightest new light?
Well, brightest new light is Justify, and I tell you what, for the granddaddy rule of them all for the Derby is Apollo, 0 for 61 since 1937. These are 2-year-olds, or I'm sorry, the 3-year-olds that did not race at age 2. Justify made his career debut on February the 18th. Guys, I cannot believe with that big scarlet letter A standing for Apollo stamped on his forehead. I not only think is he a new shooter, I think he's a serious new shooter. I've got him in my top 3. I just think this horse trained by Bob Baffert, you know, if I'm going to give you a sports analogy, Tua Tagovailoa for Alabama's QB at halftime. We never heard of this guy, and all of a sudden he comes in on the second half, and just your jaws drop. That's what Justified did for me.
There's a reason we call him Tua, by the way. James, how about you?
I'm going to mention a horse impact player for Todd Pletcher. He added blinkers 2 starts ago, recorded a real nice win in Gulfstream, came back, won another race. He's by City Zip, a little bit of a concern on top, but his dam's a half-brother to Candy Ride, who's a top sire of Gunrunner, who won last year's Breeders' Cup Classic. So impact player is a player I'm looking forward to.
Mr. DeRosa?
Well, we've talked a lot about horses. We've already seen what they can do, big top figures from both Deorro, McKenzie, Good Magic, etc. But this is the time of year where horses can improve and get better. And I think we saw that last out from Mississippi, even in defeat. I saw his maiden win here at Churchill. I thought it was great. It looks like he is taking that step forward. He will need another step forward next out, but to me, at this stage in the game, we're getting the right price to find out, and he's one I'm excited to see hopefully take that next step.
Intriguing candidates all, none bigger than Mr. Rogers, who is trying to break history that has gone back to 1882 when Apollo won his Kentucky Derby. As the days on the calendar flip away toward the road, the Kentucky Derby on Derby Day on Saturday, May 5th. A lot to be settled over the next 2 months, and some closing thoughts on where we are now, where we might be in 2 months.
Well, to me, it's waiting on those 2-year-old superstars to run back, both Deorro and Good Magic. We talked about looking forward to the races, talked about how good their races were last year. But as we know on the Derby Trail, it doesn't always work out that the 2-year-olds go on with it. So that's definitely what I'm looking forward to most over the next couple weeks. And really, there's a chance if either one runs lights out, be a heavy, heavy favorite in that Pool 3 of the Future Wager.
James?
Yeah, I'll echo those thoughts. Really looking forward to the horses come back to run their first start as 3-year-olds. Right now, like I said before, the picture's really a little bit jumbled, but these upcoming races will help sort things out. And one other thing I'll mention is I like to keep an open mind. I like, some of these horses I might not like now might come on, so just keep an open mind going forward, and looking forward to the next round of preps.
You bring up a very good point. Do not get married to a top 10 list. Do not. I mean, just don't. You don't have to. I'm looking forward to this coming into a much sharper focus as we, march closer and closer to the first Saturday in May.
And races all over the country for all those races as we march toward Kentucky Derby Day. We'll go to the Fountain of Youth on March 3rd. Heading into the month of March further, on to the 10th. We've got 3 big races on that day. The Gotham with Aqueduct, the San Felipe with Santa Anita, the Tampa Bay Derby will be run, and then the Rebel back to Oaklawn Park a week later. So don't know if we'll tell the tale by then, but we'll be getting closer. The Road to the Kentucky Derby has been brought to you by Woodford Reserve.